before we do finally get to Columbus, first we have to take a look at, of all places, China. During the Ming Dynasty, at roughly around the same time that the fleets of Prince Henry of Portugal were discovering those various islands off the coast of Africa in the the first third of the 15th century. And this individual, this is a mannequin from a museum, an admiral of the Chinese Navy at that time, the Navy of the Ming Dynasty, Zheng He. And by the way, that's how you pronounce his name, Zheng He. The E-N-G sounds like ung, kind of like the word F-E-N-G-S-H-U-I is feng shui. So anyway, Zheng He. Zheng He was an admiral in command of a huge fleet, an exploration fleet that traveled all through the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, looking for new contacts for the empire, for the Ming Empire, and establishing trade and diplomacy with these various new places. I said he had a huge fleet. That means there were a lot of ships, and also the ships were pretty huge. So in this photograph, the same museum exhibit, you see in the front, that is a replica of one of Christopher Columbus's three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. So they were all carracks, roughly of that size. That other ship behind them is the Chinese ships that Zheng He commanded. Columbus had three. Zheng He had about 62 of that huge size, plus another 225 smaller ones, which were support vessels, and overall, in his fleet, 25,000 men. This was a huge operation. So, he made 7 voyages of exploration, and here are some of them. You can see that he covered all through Southeast Asia and South Asia and into Saudi Arabia area, into North Africa, to Mogadishu, and down the eastern coast of Africa. Now, what ultimately happened was that the emperor died and there was a new emperor. And the new emperor decided that this huge fleet was basically a waste of men and material because his reasoning was China, being a huge place and being the Middle Kingdom, being basically the center of the earth, had everything they needed. They didn't need trade with other groups of people. They were self-sufficient. Therefore, he sent messengers to Zheng He, who was about a third of the way, almost a half of the way down the east coast of Africa, to bring his fleet back home to China. Now, because Zheng He's fleet was so huge, it moved kind of slowly. So they were able to get word in faster vessels. That's how they were able to reach him. So he had to turn around and come back to China, wherein the entire fleet was decommissioned and all the ships were broken apart and the wood used for other projects. And that was the end of the voyages of Zheng He. However, it's very interesting to think about what would have happened if that first emperor had lived longer, or if the second emperor had had a different attitude, if Zheng He had been able to continue his voyages. Now, in the year 1500, the Portuguese navigator Pedro Alvarez Cabral found Brazil, and the way he found it was he was traveling southward and he swung out to get past that big area in West Africa, and when he hit that certain area in the South Atlantic that is very turbulent, very stormy and very windy, he was blown off course. See, so he was headed southward along the coast of Africa, blown off course, right into Brazil, which, by the way, is why they speak Portuguese in Brazil to this day. So that was in the year 1500. Zheng He was called back in, I think, 1433. So it is not hard to imagine if he had been able to continue and he had rounded the tip of Africa and then gone up the west coast of Africa and hit that same area of the South Atlantic that is so turbulent, there's every reason to believe he also would have been blown over into Brazil. And if that had happened, all those countries in South America where they speak Spanish and Portuguese in Brazil now might well have been speaking Chinese instead. And the fact that Spain had gone from essentially a second or third rate power to the foremost power of the 16th century because they got to the New World first and all that gold and silver. What if it had been China? The whole history of the world would have been vastly different. And that's one of the fascinating things about history. It can turn on a dime. Now, at last, we're ready to talk about Cristoforo Colombo, as he was known in his native Italy, or Cristobal Colon, as he was known in Spain, or Christopher Columbus, as he was known in Ohio and other English-speaking places. Now, perhaps you're like me, and most of your early knowledge of history and social studies came from Bugs Bunny cartoons, and if so, maybe you remember this one. Here We Go, it was called, in which Bugs Bunny stows away on Columbus's ship. And if you've seen it, perhaps you will remember the beginning, and this is kind of it's obviously very exaggerated with perhaps some offensive ethnic accents, as was the norm in 1951 when this came out. But it also kind of summarizes what most of us perhaps were taught in first grade or whatever. So at the beginning of this cartoon, Columbus is in an argument with the King of Spain about the shape of the earth.
Round, lad, round, lad, round, lad, round. Columbo, the world she's flat. The world she's around. She's flat. Look, King, she's around like the apple. She's flat like the pancake. Pasta fazooka. She's around, she's a firm, she's a fully packed. She's around like my head. She's flat like your head.
Most of us were indeed taught that in the time of Columbus, almost everybody believed the world was flat and were fearful to venture out too far, because if you went out too far on the sea, you would fall off the edge of the world. And that Columbus had figured out that no, the earth is actually a globe. The earth is round, and it's not flat at all. And so he went around to all these different kings and queens to try to get them to finance his voyage to prove that the world is round, and they all refused to do it because they didn't believe him. Well, that's not actually how it went. The fact is that people had figured out as far back as the 5th century BC in classical Greece that the earth was round, and most educated people in Europe knew that the earth was round. It actually doesn't take that much to figure out. You don't have to be a scientific genius. Just the fact that there is a horizon kind of gives it away. So it wasn't a new idea. And that wasn't why people were rejecting Columbus. And that's not what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to prove the earth is round. Now, if the earth is in fact round, then if you want to get to the east, Columbus wasn't the only one who figured out you could potentially do it by heading due west. Why had no one done that? Well, because, as we've previously discussed, until the 15th century, they didn't have ships capable of going great distances on the ocean, but also, generally, for many centuries, people had had a pretty good idea, scientists had had a pretty good idea how big the Earth. I said earlier, no one has any idea. No one knew for sure. But most scientists believe from the calculations they made that it was pretty big, and that if that were the case, there would be a whole lot of empty ocean between the Atlantic and reaching the east. However, Columbus had done some computation of his own. He had done some math of his own, and turns out he wasn't very good at math. He was way off. He thought the globe was much smaller than it actually is, and that's why nobody would give him money for this venture. So he wanted to boldly head out and go due west and prove, not that the world was round, because educated people knew that, but to prove that he was right and it wasn't that big, and you could in fact get to India. And he wanted to be called Lord Admiral of the Navy of whatever country he did this for, and he wanted 10% of all proceeds of everything that they found. But he needed ships. He needed someone to pay for those ships and those men. And the advisors, the scientists, who were the consultants of these various kings and queens that he went to, said, yeah, this is pretty stupid. He is way off. And he did, in fact, go to the King of Portugal, and then he went to the kings of Lisbon and Genoa, two city-states in Italy. He went to the King of England. He went to the King and Queen of Spain, and they were kind of in the middle of a war, but they put him off. They didn't tell him no, definitely, so he kept coming back to them. He was planning to go check with the King of France. Probably wouldn't have gotten very far there either. But finally, he got approval from the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, after they had kind of been putting him off for a long time and had denied him several times on the advice of their counselors, who said his math is way off. Finally, on the umpteenth time that Columbus brought this before them, the chief economic advisor to the Queen essentially talked them into giving it a try, because he said, we don't really have that much to lose. It wouldn't be that big of an investment, really, compared to the possible return if he did actually, by some miracle, make it somewhere. It's important to bear in mind the situation of Spain at this time. Spain was really a new country. The area there where Spain had been controlled for centuries by the Moors, the Muslim invaders from North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula. That's where Spain and Portugal were. And then gradually, slowly, they had beaten back the Moors and retaken, the Christian Europeans, retaken more and more areas, one of those areas being Portugal, a couple of other areas being the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. Well, Ferdinand was the king of Aragon, and Isabella was the queen of Castile, and they got married. And when they got married, that combined their two kingdoms, which made up most of what is now Spain. And that's how Spain became a country. And that's why at first they didn't give any really heed to Columbus when he first came before them in 1588, because they were trying to defeat the last outpost of the Moors in Granada. And then finally in 1492, Granada fell and they unified all of Spain. Why does this matter? It matters because Spain is a brand new country. Portugal has jumped way out ahead of Spain as a result of the discoveries that they had made along the coast of Africa. So Spain is kind of at a big disadvantage. They're brand new. They're kind of a second or third rate country, and they wanted to not get left completely in the dust by Portugal. They wanted to compete with the other countries. Therefore, they were more willing to take a gamble on Columbus ultimately, more so than the other kings and queens that he had approached. So in 1492, Columbus set off with his 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and a crew of between 85 and 90 men. And in October of 1492, they reached the Caribbean, which Columbus, of course, thought was India. And that's why the islands of the Caribbean, to this day, are called the West Indies. If you've ever heard of them spoken that way, or if you've ever heard of someone from the Bahamas or Jamaica described as West Indian, that's where that comes from. Eventually, Columbus made 4 trips back and forth, establishing several colonies, and insisted until the day he died that it was all happening in India. However, the rest of the world pretty quickly figured out that no, he hadn't actually been to India. He had actually discovered, actually more like run into, a huge landmass in between Europe and Asia as you go to the west. Now, Columbus was kind of hard-pressed to explain if he, he was hard set to explain the distance involved. Eventually, he started claiming that the world wasn't actually a globe at all, but it was actually shaped more like a pear as you get closer to the equator, and that's why, that's why the distances seem different. The whole world pretty well laughed at Christopher Columbus about this and about him insisting he was in India, because everyone knew he wasn't. But Columbus could be kind of stubborn. Anyway, the area he did land on first was an island in the Caribbean, an island which the natives of that island, the Taino people, called Haiti, but which Columbus named Hispaniola, or Little Spain. And he established a colony there called Santo Domingo, which grew into a city which is still there. Now today, that island is comprised of 2 different countries. On the east end of the island, you have the Dominican Republic, with Santo Domingo as the capital. And on the west end, you have Haiti, where they speak French. And we'll be talking later about how that came to pass. Eventually, Columbus also winds up in, I think, Puerto Rico and Cuba, but he actually never sets foot on the continent of North America or in Central or South America. He's only in the islands. All right, well, when he first arrived, he and his men first arrived on the island they named Hispaniola, they were greeted by the indigenous natives, the Taino. They are part of a larger group called the Arawak, who were very peaceful people and who were very welcoming of Columbus and his crew. And in fact, we know a lot about the incidents that occurred when Columbus landed, because, being a ship's captain, he kept a log, a diary, if you will, which was written in Spanish, I believe. I don't think he wrote it in Italian. I think he wrote it in Spanish, but it's been translated into English for, about 500 years now. And here are some of the things Columbus had to say about the people he met that he thought were in India, so he called them Indians, or in Spanish, Indios. He said, "It appears to me that the people are ingenious and would be good servants, and I am of opinion that they would very readily become Christians, as they appear to have no religion. Well, we know that's not true. They very quickly learn such words as are spoken to them. If it please our Lord, I intend at my return to carry home 6 of them to your highnesses, that they may learn our language. Now, he doesn't really say whether that was going to be voluntary or not. He also says about the islands, they are all extremely verdant and fertile, verdant meaning green, with the air agreeable, and probably contain many things of which I am ignorant, not inclining to stay here, but visit other islands in search of gold. And considering the indications of it among the natives who wear it upon their arms and legs, and having ascertained that it is the true metal, by showing them some pieces of it which I have with me, I cannot fail, with the help of our Lord, to find the place which produces it. So let's kind of back up there and unpack what he's saying. These islands are beautiful, he's saying. They're beautiful and green and fertile and all kinds of nice stuff. The climate's great. There's probably all kinds of cool stuff here, but I don't care because there's gold. I saw evidence of gold, and I'm going to find it, essentially. He then concludes by saying, with 50 men, this is after describing how peaceful and kind the people are. With 50 men, they can all be subjugated and made to do what is required of them. Now, as I said, he made several trips back and forth. He left about, 50 men there to set up this settlement, this camp. And they immediately started throwing their weight around with the Taino people and raping their women and so forth. On the third voyage, his third trip, when he stopped off at Hispaniola again, he ordered every Taino over the age of 14 to deliver to him a bell full of gold or 25 pounds of spun cotton every 3 months. If they didn't have the gold, then they got to come up with 25 pounds of cotton every 3 months. Each individual who did not provide the goods was to have their hands and feet cut off. And that happened. Now, bear in mind, Columbus had a contract to keep 10% of all the goods that he took. Obviously, that includes the gold. Well, some other things that took place as he was there is, for example, in addition to enslaving the people in mass, in large quantities, and forcing them to do the labor at these new colonies, in addition to just regular slavery, he also participated in and promoted sex slavery. He specifically looked for attractive women that could be enslaved and forced to be the sex slaves of his men. In fact, in the year 1500, he wrote in that, actually, it wasn't in his diary, it was in a letter to a friend back home. And by the way, a castellano is a unit of currency. He said, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm. And it is very general. And there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. So, he shows up. The people are very welcoming to him, very kind. Immediately starts brutalizing them, starts enslaving them, starts taking their women and just wantonly raping them, and even takes their 9 and 10-year-old little girls to be sex slaves. In addition to the fact that he was cutting off people's hands and feet and killing anyone who resisted him. And one of the ways that Columbus's men liked to do this was to set hunting dogs on the native people to tear them to pieces. All right, now Columbus was an a-hole. Let's just get that out of the way right up front. And you will hear people frequently saying, these politically correct people trying to change history. Columbus is a great hero. Well, okay, no one's changing history. Remember what we said about primary source documents. This is Columbus's own diary. And people have had access to it for 500 years. Now, I sometimes hear people say that, it's not fair to judge someone by the standards of the 21st century when they lived in an earlier time. And I agree with that. I do. I agree with that. However, I do think it's fair to judge someone by the standards and morals of their own time. And the fact is, Columbus's behavior just totally freaked out lots of people in Spain. It freaked out Queen Isabella, who had primarily, been willing to be behind this venture because she was hoping to get converts to the church. Well, you're not getting converts to the church when you're cutting their hands off and raping their children. Eventually, Columbus was arrested for gross mismanagement of the colony and for his brutality and sent back to Spain in chains. Eventually, he was set free, but he was in prison for a little while, and he never got his 10% because, it was just believed he didn't deserve it. And his descendants continued taking the Spanish crown to court, trying to get that 10%, but they never did. So, when you hear people defending Christopher Columbus, they don't know the whole story, okay? And there were a lot of other people in Spain that really opposed this kind of treatment of the native peoples. This goes back to what I think I may have said before, that Columbus and the people who came behind him and their crews were adventurers. They were mercenaries. They were looking to get rich by any means possible. And the things they did and the way that they did them is not necessarily how the average person in Spain might have wanted to see it done. Within 20 years, the Taino people on the island of Haiti or Hispaniola were virtually extinct. Now, no doubt, I bet you could guess what my opinion is about Columbus Day. I think it should be called Taino Remembrance Day, and that's what I call it. Well, I have some of those passages from Columbus's diary that I was quoting from that I'm going to leave up here just for a couple of seconds a piece, so that you can pause the video if you want to and actually see the words for yourself.